November 14, 2023, the time's 10 a.m. I'm calling this meeting to order. Are there any changes to the agenda? Okay, hearing none. Public comment? Okay, hearing none. Our first item is Auditor's Office Quarterly Financial Update with our Finance Director, Brandy Falcon, please.
Good morning, Commissioners. Brandy Falcon for the record. Before you should all have your quarterly report. Our office is required by statute to compile this every quarter, and we send a copy up to each commissioner. Our senior accountant, Rayanne, compiles this for us, and then Keith is the main reviewer. So I'm just going to walk through this document since it's the first time in a while that we've actually presented this to you. Going forward, we'll be presenting it quarterly. And then at the end, if you have any questions, we can go through that as well. I did print out a very brief summary and give it to you all of the FY22 and 23 budget and actual for our main largest buckets of revenue aside from property tax, since we talk about them a lot during budget cycle. That would be revenue sharing, sales tax, liquor, interest, and then gain loss on our investments, just so you can see a year over year comparison. And then going forward in FY24, we're going to incorporate a page for some key revenue indicators like this in the quarterly, just so you can see as you're going through the year how our state revenues are coming in to budgeted. And then I think we're also going to add some of our largest fee earning departments, community development, DMV, recorder. We might add a couple others. So you'll see that in the FY24 quarterlies this next fiscal year. So starting in this document on page 1, the bulk of this document is just going to be summaries of expenditures, budgeted expenditures to actual for each elected and each elected official's department. So on page 1, there's just a summary in total for each elected official, budget to actual. The next page, on page 2, we have a snapshot of all of our budget amendments at the time the quarterly report was compiled. So you can see at the top, we start with the adopted budget of $120 million, and down at the bottom, after all budget adjustments, we come in at $202 million. Next page, page 3.
Okay, so the grants and our budget expense and accounting. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And then page 3 is going to be starting where we dive into each department for the BOCC, specifically budgeted expenditures to actuals. So it's every single department. The 2 through 4 on page 3, so the ones labeled department, general accounts, and tax support. A lot of different departments fall under those codes, and so we break out those codes specifically on page 5, if you wanted to go into more detail of those. So starting on page 3, you have all the BOCC departments and budgets. Continuing on page 4. On the side, we have a notes column, and that's going to reference to a page in the back of the book. We'll go through it when we get there with explanations for over budget items. So BOCC continues on page 5, and then on pages 6, 7, 8, and 9, that is all of the grants and projects under the BOCC. So for each elected official, if they have grants or projects, we break them out separately. So for example, on page 8, at the top, you can see that we have ARPA. So that's probably the grant that you're most familiar with that comes to mind that's under the BOCC. So I would point out that the Justice Building is broken out separately. So kind of towards the bottom, you can see in the budget column the $26,676,000. That's the budget for the Justice Building. In the middle, you can see what we actually spent this year, and the remaining funds is what we're going to be rolling forward into the next fiscal year. So with grants, money that doesn't get spent in the current fiscal year gets rolled forward to the next year. And since you're looking at the fourth quarter of FY23, you're seeing the remaining grant funds that are going to be rolled over to the next year. That continues to page 9, and then page 10 we have the clerk departments. Page 11 is the treasurer. 12 is the assessor. Page 13 is the coroner. Page 14 is the sheriff. Continuing on to page 15. And then we break out the sheriff's drug seizure funds separately on page 16 because those fall under some special statutory requirements with how those funds are treated. So you can see at the top the $100,000 that was budgeted and then spent in the state drug seizure fund. That's the $100,000 the board approved to be paid to the helicopter. And then, starting on page 17, we have all the sheriff's grants and projects, which continues on page 18. Page 19, we have the prosecuting attorney's expenditures to actual, and then the prosecutor's grant. Page 20 is going to be district court. You can see that district court is over budget again. This is the second year in a row. They, as a total, have been over budget. And then they have one grant on there. Okay, so now we're through all the elected officials. And then starting on page 21, we're going to have some more like higher level snapshots. So page 21 is going to be all of the property tax revenue broken out by fund. Now, in the budgeted column, that $60 million at the bottom, that does not equal our property tax levy amount, because in that budgeted column, we're including our special assessment taxes, the tax amount for KCMS, the ambulance district, as well as budgeted late charges and interest. So if you go to the next page, pages 22 and 23 actually break out in detail property tax by year in each fund, what's budgeted, what was actually received, and then the difference. So you can see all the lines that say late property tax charge and interest, those amounts being included, that's kind of the extra that's being added in on top of our levy amount, if that makes sense. Page 24 is going to be a summary of all revenues that are not property tax, so all of our non-property tax revenues by fund. That does include our grant funds. You can see that in the far left column, we have our amended budget of revenues for each fund. Then in the center, we have the actual amount of revenue received for each fund, and then on the far right, the difference. Now, we have a significant amount of entries and adjustments that happen during the first quarter of FY24, where we're closing the prior fiscal year. We have our audit, we're issuing our financials. So these are unaudited numbers. You'll get final numbers when we issue the financials in the spring. Page 25 is going to be a summary of cash, beginning and ending balances in each fund. We don't list our trust and our agency accounts here because we have a lot of trust funds, and that's just us holding cash for other agencies. That's not money available to the county for our use. So here we're showing you county cash in each fund. Page 26 is going to be a snapshot of our fund balances. And this page is static. It does not change throughout the year. It changes one time a year when we do our fund balance resolution in the spring. So the first column is our audited beginning fund balances. It says audited FY22, so that's our beginning balances for FY23. Next is our restricted fund balances, funds that have restrictions on them, usually by an outside authority, like a statute. Next is fund balance that we budgeted in the adopted budget to use for operations during the year. Next is our capital carry forward, so that is the resolution the board does every year to draw down fund balance in the next fiscal year to roll forward funds for unfinished capital projects. Next, we have assigned. That's fund balance the board has placed an assignment on. So you can see the $1.5 million in Fund 10. That's the $1 million for healthcare and the $500,000 for grant match. And then the $18 million is Fund 11, is all of the different buckets of money in Fund 11 that you've assigned to jail pods, KC North, all of those things. That's in Fund 11. And then lastly, your unassigned fund balance is the county's emergency funds. So you can see that in Funds 10 and 15, that is where we carry our emergency funds for the year. So in the spring, when we do our new fund balance resolution, those emergency fund numbers will change based upon the new allocation the board decides on. Page 27 is a snapshot capturing the activity in each fund balance. So you can see, again, the beginning fund balance for each fund, the revenues and expenses, which gives you the year-to-date change in each fund, and then you get the current fund balance. Again, this is unaudited. We have a lot of adjustments that will be forthcoming, and you have to remember that these include all of those different buckets: restricted, assigned, committed. So you can't just look and say, oh, $17 million. You have to remember $17 million is going to be broken out and parsed out in different categories. And then lastly, on page 28, the lime green page, this is probably the one people care the most about. This is an explanation for all the different over budget items. If you have questions on any of these, we can dig into them. And then lastly, at the end, this blue and white sheet, this is our summary of all of the county's grants. And since, again, we're looking at fourth quarter, if you go to the end, you can see grand total under grant awards, $63.5 million. That essentially means our county received 63.5 million in grant funds this year. So, and this is just a summarized breakout of every single grant. So I know that was a lot, but it's the first time we've done this in a while, so I wanted to give you kind of the layout of how this goes. It's usually easier if you review it ahead of time and we can dig into questions you have when we present it. So do you guys have any specific questions on this?
Oh, I usually just start with the green sheet.
Right, that's what most people do. Yeah, and fund balance. And it's always available on our website. We post it online every quarter.
So when do we get the final numbers?
In the spring, when we issue our financial report, Keith and I will come back and present that to you. That's usually probably going to be in April.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, correct.
because our financials, we have to get audited, then we have to write the financials, and then they have to go through several different layers of review, both with us and with Ide Bailey, our auditors. So it takes a while. Thank you.
Any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right, item 2, advisory board applications. So, this season, this is Bruce's first season through this process, so I thought we would talk about how we wanted to treat it. Jonathan put together, I guess Jonathan and Sarah have been working together on all the advisory board stuff, and this sheet here talks about who reapplied and who didn't. Then there's another sheet that talks about all the specific applicants. This just gives us a total applicants for each one. So Airport Advisory Board has 21 total applicants. Planning and Zoning has 9. The Fair has 5, and so on, so forth for our 10 advisory boards. So what typically in the past we've done is we've gone through the applications and the re-applications and said, okay, I'm fine with reapproving or reappointment, thank you, couldn't figure that word out. Okay, reappointment of the ones that we want to reappoint, and then if there's ones that we want to interview. And of course, all the people for reappointment are available for
Yeah.
interview too. So we can do it how we've done some of the things in the past where we give Jonathan and Sarah our choices for who we want to interview for this process. And then they can pick, all the ones that have 2 out of 3 votes then would be scheduled before us.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting because there's definitely a lot of applicants, a lot of boards, lots of boards. And most of the people I'm just not as familiar with, where I believe both you and Commissioner Brooks have more familiarity with some of these folks. So I would almost wonder if it would be a problem if I interviewed some of these people on my own before making a pick. And you
could do that.
and the both of you could make your picks. And for those that I certainly agree with, we can bring them before the board. And for those that I just am not familiar with, I could spend a few minutes either on the phone or in person just getting to know them. And then I would just need to know what the deadlines are for these kind of decisions, because I believe certainly by the middle of December, you'd want to be able to make these decisions.
Yeah, that's typical, but we've waited as long as January before when we just haven't been able to make it work on our schedule.
Yeah, I mean, there's really 2 boards that stand out to me. One is the Airport Advisory Board, because we had so many applicants for that. And then the other is just Planning and Zoning, because there's no opportunity for the board to have folks reapply. We have to wait for their terms. The other ones, I really didn't see too much of an issue in the sense that there weren't that many applicants, there weren't that many people reapplying.
Right. So to your point, our first year on the board, we actually had everybody reapply.
Yeah.
So that is
Kind of start fresh.
to start fresh. That is an option. I mean, that's just going to be a lot more time.
Yeah.
I like the idea of, excuse me, people who have reapplied And I know some of them, some of
Your
some
microphone's
of them I do not.
Mm-hmm.
But just because I may disagree with one of them or have a different philosophy than one of them, I don't want to deny them. If they want to serve again, I'd just as soon have them serve. So I would like to take anybody who's reapplied and blanket without going just say, if you've reapplied, you're good to go. And then what we have left are the vacancies, and then work on those hard.
Yeah. If I think I understood you correctly, you were basically saying that for those who are reapplying, that they are generally okay to stay on board.
I would say so.
Yeah.
They've shown that they've got a willingness to serve.
Yes, and I would tend to agree with you. The only reason I would even just want to have a little bit of an opportunity, and I would suggest I do it on my own time and not have the board get bogged down with it, is because every once in a while, having a fresh perspective, I think, enhances these boards. And so I'd just like to at least have that opportunity to look at that. But I agree with you in the sense that, there is a certain time commitment. And I'd like to make sure that whoever we do have on the boards can live up to the time commitment. Just because being on a board is really the beginning, it's not the end.
Right.
And I would also point out that these are generally what the advisory board advises. We agree with, maybe with some minor modification.
Yeah.
But they are advisory boards. They're not the final word. What they say is not the way it's going to be. But I don't want to say we rubber stamp it, but we generally agree with what they've come up with because they've spent more time on a particular issue than we have.
Yeah, and that's a valid point. So, how would you recommend? Would each of you like to just present your own candidates of who you want to interview, and then I can work with staff on just setting up my own interviews with some folks that I want to talk to who may not be on your recommendation list, or you might have just some small overlap, and then the rest there's less overlap, and I would interview the ones where there's no overlap.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. The way I look at it is I go through all of the reapplications to find out how long they've been on the board and if there is any feedback. Like sometimes we have, the Board of Community Guardians, even though we've had people on there since 1991, it is a very specialized board with specialized skills and a lot of hands-on work,
Yeah.
confidential hands-on work. So
Yeah.
those I would tend to just reappoint, but some of the other ones who might have had somebody on there for 20 years, then I may look at changing that out for a fresh perspective.
Yep.
When I look at the applicants, I look at, do they actually live in the county or do they live in a city? And then I look at if, how long they've been in the county too.
Oh, yeah.
And, yeah, and then planning and zoning is also one that's particular where we actually have statutory guidelines where we can't have the majority in a city, they have to be in the county.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I look at it. So it's really an individual thing, how you want to look at it, but I'm happy to give all my people that I would like to interview to staff, and then you can see that list and decide who you.
Sure. And so if that works for you, you can provide your own lists. And I'll work with staff on maybe interviewing people who are only on one of your lists, or, I guess if they have to be on one of your lists, because if they're not on either list, they won't get much further than that. So if that works with you, I'll work with staff, and I just would really need to know a deadline of when you want to have these people before us.
So I will be out December 15th, so if we could do things before then, that would be great. I'm not sure when I'll be back the following week.
Well, I was thinking certainly before the end of the month.
The end of this month. Well, Thanksgiving's next week, so that's a shortened week, so it'd be the last week.
Well, I've
Might
got the
be able to
balance
do
of
that.
this week and then
Yep.
some time after Thanksgiving.
Yep. Yeah, to schedule the interviews or just for your list?
for my list.
Oh, yeah, that's.
And that way it'd be finalized by the end of the month, and then
And then the first 2 weeks in December, we could do interviews.
the board,
Yep,
yes.
the board interviews, yeah, that's
So if
perfect.
that works, then, okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
that's great. Okay, Jonathan, anything else to add or cover? Okay, great. All right, item 3 is owner's representative. So we interviewed 2 people last week, and they gave us kind of their things that they can do for us. And so we're here to talk about how we want to move forward.
Do you guys have any thoughts on the folks that came before us?
No. Be interested in what you all are thinking.
Okay. I think they both can do an excellent job. I think that I'm leaning towards Huey at this point because they're local. And I think it's just a little bit more responsive for where we're at in our project. I did go through Huey's list of all the things that they do provide, and I picked out a few things that I think would be very helpful to us at this point in the project. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I agree. I felt like they prepared a little bit more for the presentation. And because they were local, it just seemed they could be a little more responsive. What I liked with both of them was that we can pick as much or as little as we want. And I think that, the way to approach this is to, start at the top, look for anything that there's a discrepancy, maybe go a layer or 2 below, but not necessarily down to the most granular level unless we're really finding issues, because at that point, we're going to be spending a lot of money. We want to make sure that we can seek to have a return on it, even if it's a return that we don't, it's not as apparent, because we just need someone who knows the questions to ask. That's really the challenge of getting involved in these projects that we don't have experience in, is we don't know what questions to ask that beforehand that keeps us out of hot water later. So I agree with you with the theory.
Which,
Oh, sorry.
this is the one you had the 2 groups
Left.
here.
The one on the left.
Our
This is the one you all are,
Yes.
Okay.
Correct. Yes, these gentlemen were from Boise.
right,
And then,
good, I got it. I remember very much what they said.
sure.
I just didn't remember who they were.
Yeah.
So I like the people on the left.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'll read, if you don't mind, just a couple places where we can start, because I think they might want a scope to start with. And then I don't know how you want to figure out where to point them in the right direction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it begins with sitting down with them
Okay.
and saying, okay, you've done these projects before a number of times. And so where do you see the biggest slip, for lack of a better way to characterize it, in these projects where the owner has started it, and where do you think that you could make the biggest impact for us? And I'd have them start there and look for, again, lack of a better way to characterize it, look for smoke, and see if it's real or not.
Okay,
So.
that's fine. And do you perceive doing that as a board, or do that with you and Boughton and Huey, or?
Well, I think it should start with the board,
Okay,
and we should hear what they have to say. I think that they would probably be able to give at least a good recommendation of where they could start with some guidance, meaning, we don't have to go down to the most granular level in the beginning, but let's start looking at the places where you think you can make the biggest difference.
okay. And then, so I guess during then is when I'll bring up my areas where I think that they'll be the most useful.
I'd be anxious to hear what they say first.
Okay.
Before you, and then
Yep.
we can have that discussion if that's okay.
Yeah, that works out fine. That is
You're
all
probably
good.
gonna have a good overlay, if I were to guess.
Okay. So with that, we would need to sign a contract, which can be on next Tuesday's business meeting. That would give legal enough time to review it. My concern is there's no addendum because they don't know the scope of work. So we're kind of approving something that is nebulous at this point. How would you like to do that?
Well, the one way we can do it is we can allocate a certain dollar amount to the project
Okay,
and then say, here's what we're hoping to get for that dollar amount. And they're gonna either say that's reasonable, or we would recommend you increase it by a certain amount, and I think we could, work that way. No, I mean, we actually had a very similar experience with council and giving a dollar amount and saying, hey, this is what we want to achieve.
okay, so are you able to bring Harry's contract forward and then work with Auditor's office on the salary savings from the position we've not filled, the facilities director? Because I think that would be a good number to start with, that it's already money that we've saved for,
Yeah.
probably going to be 3 months. I mean,
Yeah.
we could start.
I think we could probably start 3 months of that salary. So, 30,
It's almost, well, I think
about
it's
30,
30 grand.
well, between 25 and 30,
Okay. Yeah.
because we have a pretty good sized range, so. Yeah, I think, because that'd be the end of December, right? Yeah, so, yeah, well, I'll work with Brandy on that, and we'll come up with something that way. And I'll talk with them beforehand, here, and see what they recommend too, because if it goes beyond that, then I'll just bring it before the next status update, and we can talk about that.
Okay, yeah, that would be great, but you can always put the contract on the agenda for next Tuesday, and if we're not there yet, then we're not there yet, but I want to get it done as soon as possible.
Yeah. Yes, no, I understand.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
No, that sounds like what we need to do.
Okay. Oh. Okay, thank you. All right, with that, I will call for public comment. Come to a microphone, please, Ron.
Good morning, thank you.
You need to turn the microphone on. Just push the,
I don't have my glasses.
yeah, thank you.
There you go.
Good morning, thank you. My name's Ron Hartman. Just a general comment that would apply to all meetings. Like when this lady went through the budget, none of us could see any of the pages. Or when you have handouts that you have, but none of us that are here to attend, we've got the equipment right here. It would be nice if it would be on a PowerPoint or something on the screen so the rest of us could see it. That's all.
Thank you. All right, no other public comment. 10:29, meeting adjourned. Thank you all.